Another day, another mass shooting. I'm not going to talk about the specifics of this case. There was a recent mass shooting. I think, it's a little early for us to reach too many conclusions about this specific case, and also I think there's a strong philosophical argument for not talking too much about the person involved, showing their face, their name. Um, there's pretty strong evidence that in many of these cases, although certainly not all, there is a motivation on the part of the perpetrators to become famous by their actions. And well, I certainly don't favor preventing other people from talking about it. I think it makes sense to try and not uh, have it be understood that doing something like this is not going to get you the attention you want is one of the things that can help prevent it. But that's not the main thing I want to talk about here. It seems impossible for events like this to happen without us going into a debate about gun control again and again and again and again and again. And the division lines in our society on this are quite stark. And the ability of people on either side to communicate with each other is quite limited. So I don't watch the news. The only time I ever see it is when I'm at the gym and the volume is off. So I tend not to have the most direct idea about what's going on all the time. I don't look at Facebook that often. I'm not on YouTube that often anymore. I'm not on Reddit ever. I'm basically doing my own thing, and it's only what I get filtered through that I learn about. So I saw a post from a friend of mine, and he said something to the effect of 17 dead, and it's happening again, which is a common trope that you hear from that side, that this is a recurrent theme, and also that this only happens in the United States. And I was roused from my slumber to start a long Facebook debate with predictable back and forth. And one of my resolves is that if I'm in a debate on Facebook that I know is not going to be viewed by very many people and highly unlikely to persuade anyone, that I should make a YouTube video about it, because more people will see it, and I think it's a better forum for explaining stuff like this. So gun control, homicide, mass shooting, these are huge issues. I've made 40, 50 videos about them directly, and I'm not going to cover the whole thing right here. But what I do want to discuss is just the notion that mass shootings only happen in the United States. This was the sentiment that was expressed by my friend on Facebook. This is almost a unanimous impulse and belief among people who favor gun control. Very famously, right after, ironically, the Bataclan shootings in France, Obama was speaking in France. We had a mass shooting in the United States at the same time, and he said, that among developed countries, only the United States has mass shootings. It's amazingly ironic that he was saying that in France, in the aftermath of Bataclan and Charlie Hebdo, although that had happened a little bit further in the past. And what's interesting about this is that it's blatantly false. And I'm going to use here as a source PolitiFact. I don't like the methodology that PolitiFact uses here, and PolitiFact didn't make this in reply or as a result of this latest mass shooting in the United States. They made it as a reply to Obama's comments. But basically, and I'll put a link in the description, PolitiFact looked at Obama's statement that mass shootings like this don't happen in other developed countries, the term he used. They rated it as mostly false, and they broke it down as, well, you could read it as him saying mass shootings never happen in other countries, in which case that is completely false. We can go down a list of other countries, and one thing I don't like about the PolitiFact is they cherry picked just, I think, 11 countries for their consideration, and there are more than 11 countries in the world, and how you can only lower it down to those seems like blatant selection bias. But even in that, they all had mass shootings. And if you even, and like, we'll say, well, but the United States has many more mass shootings. So there was a famous mass shooting in Norway committed by Andrei Breivik, I think in 2011, where he killed upwards of 60, 70 people. And people say, well, yeah, but they had that one. That's, but yeah, it is one, but also Norway is 30 or 40 times fewer people than the United States. France is smaller than the United States. Germany is smaller than the United States. Sweden and Finland, they're all smaller than the United States. So you have to, you can't, you really need to look at the rate. You can't just look at the overall numbers. And if you look at the rate, not only do other countries have mass shootings, the United States doesn't even have the most per capita. In the list that they came up with, Switzerland, Finland, and Norway all had more than the United States. But the other thing is, so PolitiFact rated the statement that he made. If a statement is read that there are no mass shootings in other countries, that's completely false. And we can go through a list of all these other shootings. And the thing is, they don't register in the United States as much. People, gun control proponents in the United States, they're going to remember Orlando. They're going to remember Sandy Hook. They're going to remember Newtown. They're not going to remember or even be able to name the mass shootings that have happened in Germany, the ones that have happened in Finland. The one in Norway with Breivik was pretty well known, but I mean, when someone comes out and says mass shootings don't happen in other countries, that implies that they don't know about the one in Norway, or they're excluding it. There's another consideration here. A lot of people like to take mass shootings that are committed by Islamic extremists or terrorists and say, well, those don't count. That's terrorism, that's different. And I don't know why that's a distinction worth a difference. You're still talking about innocent people being killed. You're still talking about restrictive gun laws in those countries failing to prevent at least all of these incidents from happening. And so I don't understand. I don't accept the argument that we should just summarily ignore events like that for that reason. But the PolitiFact data crunch did actually do that. They didn't count Bataclan. They didn't count Charlie Hebdo. They didn't count any of the ones that are classified as terrorism. And ironically, of course, the people in the United States who favor gun control will not exclude things like San Bernardino or Orlando and say, well, those are terrorism, even though they clearly were. So there's a lot of selection bias and special pleading where things will count in the United States, but they will not count similar or identical things or nearly identical things happen in other countries. So even if you look at the per capita, though, the United States, it's in the worst half, but it's not the bottom. There were 3 countries that had worse than the United States. The problem I don't like, so they said, so that statement, if Obama was saying we have the worst in terms of per capita, that's also wrong. That's mostly false, because we're not. And even if we're in the lower third of their subset, those other states also had mass shootings. They were a thing. Now, it's also, what's interesting about this debate, mass shootings of the type that grab all the headlines are statistically probably the smallest subset of mass homicides, of homicide. I mean, I'm sure you could become even more specific and say, well, homicides committed by, Filipino gay men, and like, oh, that's a really small group. But yeah, the numbers are quite small. You are mostly dealing with drug war related homicides, gang members killing gang members, or some variation of that. And then you're having crimes of passion among people who know each other, spouses, domestic violence, stuff like that, which is not mass shootings. That's going to be single homicides or maybe double homicides, but not mass homicides. And I think it's very problematic to focus the entire debate and the entire policy discussion on what are essentially black swan events. Okay, a black swan event is something that is extremely rare, but has a disproportional effect on people's perception. So what's fascinating is that a lot of these people who are for gun control will recognize that when it comes to something like terrorism. They'll look and say, like, look, statistically, terrorism isn't such a huge threat. If you look at causes of fatality, of death overall, and even if you specify a violent death, terrorism ranks very, very lowly. low. But we have several dramatic examples of terrorism, and one extremely dramatic example of terrorism, a 9/11, which completely skews the way people view it. Our reaction to terrorism isn't based on its statistical prevalence. It's based on 9/11, essentially. And of course, whether or not you count 9/11 in the statistics actually greatly reduces them, right? So sometimes you'll see things saying, well, terrorism isn't that bad. It's only killed this small number of people from 2002. And it's like, yeah, if you include 2001, the number increases 20-fold or whatever, maybe even more than that. And I'm not saying that's necessarily invalid, but you have these outlying events. And of course, 9/11 wasn't the only one. You had Oklahoma City, you had the bombings of the embassies in Tanzania and Kenya. But these mass shootings are, if maybe not as rare as 9/11 style events, they are relatively rare. And there's this stat about mass shootings being much more common, which includes a lot of things that there's no fatalities. There's even some of the, it depends on which listing you're seeing, but the common one that was showing like one every day was including things where no one was killed, where people were shot with BB guns. If you're talking about like the FBI standard, 4 or more homicide victims in a single event, they're not that common. They do happen, but they're not that common. And if you're talking about 10 plus, it's pretty rare. Um, I don't know if that necessarily qualifies as a black swan event, but they're very rare events, and they're a very small proportion of the homicides that are happening. And to fixate on that is just, it's a totally different category of crime, right? For one thing, I've never had a debate like this where people didn't start throwing out statistics referring to, quote, gun deaths or, quote, gun violence. And those statistics are worded in a vague way so that they can include suicide every single time, right? So if you look at like gun deaths in the United States, it's more than 10 per 100,000 people per annum. Okay, that's pretty high. But 2/3 of that number, maybe even more, are suicides. Those are people killing themselves with guns. And so the number of homicides per 100,000, I think total homicides maybe even is, at the most, homicides is 4 per 100,000. It's 2.5 times less than the total number. And if you can say that suicide is tragic and that suicide is bad, but I think it's morally irresponsible and ethically irresponsible and stupid from a policy position to conflate suicides with homicides. They're not ethically the same. And not only are they not ethically the same, even though it's fine to consider suicides a tragedy and something that we should work towards alleviating, what you would need to do to reduce suicides is not necessarily the same things you would need to do to reduce, say, mass shootings or drug-related violence. And I think the elephant in the room here is that there needs to be a sincere discussion about drug policy in the United States. That there probably is a good argument for decriminalization. And I think anyone who is debating gun control and who doesn't immediately lead off with the idea that we should decriminalize drugs is not so much interested in reducing gun violence and gun deaths and gun homicides so much as just restricting guns for philosophical reasons because they make them uncomfortable. And that's a unifying feature I see in almost all of the pro-gun control argument. There are a few outspoken, very, very few, but there are very few outspoken gun control critics who are comfortable with guns personally. My friends who are adamantly pro-gun control, they admit, sometimes implicitly, sometimes explicitly, that they are just terrified at the idea of civilians with guns. It just makes them super nervous. And their perception of what it means to own a gun is completely shaped by these black swan events. They don't understand that yes, this one person went and passed a background check and committed this crime. That same day, thousands and thousands and thousands of other people went and did background checks, bought guns, and didn't commit crimes. Most of the gun owners in this country, their guns are sitting in storage, not being used for anything most of the time. Even people who use them a lot, the majority of the time, they're going to be in storage. And when they do use them, the overwhelming majority of the rounds going downrange are going to hit inert targets, whether it's paper or tin cans or berms in the back of shooting ranges or whatever else. And then there's a small, probably a relatively small fraction that's going into hunting animals or pest control, and like a minuscule amount that's going towards like self-defense or homicide, or being used in a crime. So again, if you look at statistically, it's quite overblown to focus on these events. But if you're not a gun owner, if you don't shoot regularly, it's very easy to have a completely skewed understanding of what's going on and to focus 100% on these high-profile events. And the thing is, like, these high-profile events they're interesting. I think that there is room to have a discussion about why they happen, why do they happen, where did they happen, when they do, what are the factors that go into them. I think there's a lot to be discussed about that. But if you're talking about overall gun crime and gun homicide and gun fatalities, it's a relatively minor thing, and people don't want to say that. Every life is precious, sure. We also have 55,000, and this is like the lowest. Having debated this for years, you'll get in discussions about, well, how many times are guns used defensively, and most of the estimates put the numbers in the low millions. But there are some anti-gun organizations that have come up with their own estimates, and the very, very lowest ones put ranges of 50,000 to 80,000. That's the lowest level of the lowest estimate, which I think is a bullshit estimate. But even going off that 50,000, that's 50,000 a year. That's way more than 17 people, 18 people, the 400 a year who are being killed in mass shootings, thereabouts, 400 or 500. So are you, completely failing to take that into account? I think most people who are pro-gun control definitely are failing to take that into account. They're completely ignoring it. And here's the problem. They're completely omitting contrary information, right? So when they look at the world, they want to juxtapose the United States against the rest of the world, or the rest of the quote-unquote developed world. And there's an interesting implied racism there that I'll come to in a second. But and they want to say, well, look, we have this gun culture, we have gun rights, we have the Second Amendment, we have the highest per capita gun ownership rate. So all that is true. The United States is exceptional when it comes to having a gun culture, having this many guns. There's a couple other countries that do have some form of gun culture. Switzerland has some form of a gun culture. Yemen has some form of a gun culture. Paraguay. There's a couple other countries that have it. None are exactly analogous to the United States, and none have it to the same extent. And then they'll pair that fact or that truth, which is essentially a correct truth, with, and the United States has the highest homicide or mass shootings or whatever, highest gun deaths, and they go, well, look, we've established a causal relationship here. And of course, that's a fallacy on its face, because you can't establish causation simply by correlation. But it's not even correlation, because you're admitting all contrary information, right? Other countries that don't have a Second Amendment, that don't have high gun ownership rates, that don't have people using guns in self-defense legally, they also have mass shootings. Germany has had several, Finland has several, Switzerland, Norway, Tunisia, Turkey, Russia, Mexico, these countries, and that's just the small subset that people seem willing to compare the United States to. There's a lot of willingness to compare the United States with, say, Switzerland or Liechtenstein or Luxembourg, but not a lot of there's a lot of special pleading to then not compare the United States to, say, Brazil or Mexico or South Africa, or Russia, or Indonesia or Argentina, or basically any country in Latin America or Africa. And that's kind of interesting too. It's fascinating when Donald Trump can, and I'm not a Donald Trump fan by any stretch, when Donald Trump can get in all kinds of trouble because he called Haiti a shithole. But then when we have a discussion about gun policy, countries that have absolute gun bans but have really high gun homicide rates, and if you go onto Wikipedia and you just type highest homicide per capita in the world, or even highest gun homicide per capita per world, there's something like 70-80 countries that are worse than the United States. And none of those countries have a Second Amendment. None of those countries have permissive gun laws, liberalized gun laws. None of those countries allow for concealed carry. None of those countries have an NRA. Most of those countries have either complete total civilian disarmament legally or very, very restrictive policies, policies that typically are more restrictive than you even have in a place like Australia or the UK. Certainly not anything near as liberal as the United States. And so if you take those countries into account, there's absolutely no correlation at all. And so people like to say, well, they're undeveloped, they're third world, and although it's not stated, they are essentially not white, is what is actually being said. In fact, even the term uncivilized is used. And it's fascinating that the same people who would castigate Trump for calling Haiti a shithole, or who wants to, ban immigrants from certain countries, would categorize those same countries as undeveloped third world places that shouldn't be compared to the United States. They are somehow so different that the gun control policies in those countries just can't possibly work for other reasons, other reasons that always entail special pleading. And that they only want to, cherry pick this very small subset of 15, maybe 20 countries, maybe 25, usually less than that, and say, well, let's just compare the United States to those countries. And so we can compare the United States, again, to Sweden or the Netherlands or Germany, but not to Mexico or Brazil or Russia. And I'm not sold on that argument. I think that the idea that, well, crime is related to poverty and wealth, it's not that simple. Crime is more complex than that. We don't find that there's this perfect correlation where poor areas in the United States, for instance, automatically have higher crime than wealthier areas in the United States or countries in general. So that is just a way to perform cherry picking, as far as I'm concerned. And it's also it's strangely racist. Like we're suddenly gonna just dismiss all these countries like they're just primitive savages. They can't control themselves. They're going to be violent, even if they have strict gun laws. At least that's the implication. I think that's an inescapable conclusion from the argument that people advance when they say we're just going to ignore Mexico, even though Mexico shares a border with the United States. And famously, there was a researcher who developed a correlational study, showing the United States had this much higher rate than all these other countries, and he excluded Mexico. And he said, well, the reason is because Mexico has a drug war. And it's like, yeah, and so does the United States. So should the United States also be excluded from the list? There's other problems with this, and I've gone on it in other videos, but the countries that people love to point out, like Australia and the UK, they're not even good examples because they had low homicide relative to the United States before they had gun bans. And people will look at Australia especially and say, well, look, they instituted a gun ban and their gun homicide declined after that, so it proves that bans work. And that's complete bullshit, because if you look at a graph of their homicide rate that extends before the ban, you'll see that the ban, which was instituted, I think, in 96, 97, 98, after the Port Arthur massacre, I think it was 97, maybe 98, there was a dramatic drop in violent crime that happened in 1988, 10 years before. And it just continued through that. And then after the gun control passed, a few years later, not immediately, a few years later, it actually decelerated. And I'm not saying that the gun control made it decelerate, but it clearly was crashing before that happened. And what's fascinating is overall homicide, overall gun violence in the United States has also been crashing, but we have more guns. Since violent crime in the United States kind of peaked in 91, 92, 93, and it's declined by 40 to 50% since then, and yet the number of guns in private hands has probably doubled-ish. They're not exactly sure how many there are now, and they weren't exactly sure how many there were then, but the numbers that are sold per annum indicate something around 100, 150 million new guns. These are modern guns, so these wouldn't be like muzzle loaders or six shooters, or these would have been functionally modern, mostly semi-automatic handguns and rifles, and of course lots of hunting rifles and shotguns as well, and occasionally, I'm sure, some muzzle loaders too, went into private hands, and yet we've seen crime go down. Now, I'm not one to say that that's a causal thing. It's fascinating that if you have guns and something bad happens, well, that proves that guns caused it. But then if you have guns and something good happens, oh no, no, you can't do that's correlation. You can't do correlation doesn't equal causation. Yeah, you can't be that. That's totally intellectually dishonest. You can't make that argument. Um, and the simplistic knee jerk more guns equals more crime is clearly not borne out. We have more guns and we have less crime. And again, I'm not asserting causation there. I think that human societies defy empirical certainty in that way almost always because you don't have control variables. It's not a laboratory environment. Uh, I think that the reason crime has gone down in the United States and throughout the Western world probably has lots of explanations. Famously, there's the Freakonomics people propose that it's because abortion was legalized, and that might be part of it. I think that there's good arguments that that's not the only reason, because there have been significant upticks in violent crime in the decline. There was a decline during the mid 80s, and then it upticked in the late 80s, and that does not fit with the. And there's a good book on this that I haven't formally reviewed called The Rise and Fall of Violent Crime in America, which I recommend people take a look at if they're interested in looking at violent crime without getting burdened into a gun control debate. That's a pretty good book. But that kind of nuance just doesn't have the knee-jerk simplicity of only the United States allows guns. The United States is the worst, ergo guns cause crime. That's the version that we were trying to, and the problem is for those of you who are gun control people, that's not a good argument. That's not convincing. And the forces of gun rights in this country, whether it be the NRA or the GO Gun Owners of America or the Jews for Preservation of Firearms Ownership or the Second Amendment Foundation or the Second Amendment Center, or basically most of the GOP and even some of the DNC and people like me and all the blah, 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 gunsaveslives.com, the pro-gun people in this country are aware of the arguments, mostly, for the most part. And they are not going to be persuaded, especially when you make blatantly false claims like this only happens in the United States. False. It happens in other countries. It happens in other industrialized, developed countries. Civilized countries. It happens repeatedly, and some of those countries actually have higher rates of mass homicide than the United States. Now, the United States tends to have a higher overall homicide rate than most of those countries, so I think that the gun control people would do better to focus on that and not mass shootings, right? Their argument is stronger in the overall homicide rate than it is in the mass homicide rate. But because mass homicide gets so much attention, is because it's such a fixation in the minds of people who want to ban guns, because they have, I think, an irrational fear. Like, these events are rare. We have 320 million people in this country. We have over 100 million gun owners, probably, and over 300 and something million guns. We don't have that many mass shootings. They're pretty rare, and I think it's worth study. I think it's worth talking about. We can talk about gun-free zones. We can talk about public schools generally. I mean, someone asked, what my policy positions were, and I said, well, I mean, we should abolish public schools for a myriad of other reasons besides their potential victimization in a mass shooting. But that would be one of the perks, is to not have these areas that are known to be full of victimless people. I think there is a discussion to be had about drug use in this. We don't know how much it correlates. We don't know how many of these shooters are on these drugs, and even if they are, if there's a causal connection there. But I think it's worth looking at, because it's difficult to explain. Lots of people have access to guns. Lots of people have angst of one type or another, and not that many people actually choose to do this. But yeah, it's fascinating that they would focus on mass shootings where the evidence, I mean, if we're talking about mass shootings, then Norway and Finland and Switzerland are worse than the United States. And that's even only in the subset of industrialist countries. It doesn't include places like Brazil or Russia. Actually, I think it does include Russia in the PolitiFact. I'll attach the PolitiFact. You can go read it. But because they feature so prominently in their minds, then that's what the focus is going to be. Now, and then of course there's a lot of Mott and Bailey here where they'll make these grandiose claims about gun violence. This has literally happened every single time I've engaged in a a common debate about gun control is the correlation with gun ownership and gun deaths or gun violence will be touted out as proof. And I don't think any of these people who post this are aware that that includes suicide. And I always point it out, and they never, they either are ignorant that it includes suicide, and that means that they really don't know what they're talking about. But if they are aware that it includes suicide and they're using the numbers anyway, that shows that they're conflating suicide with mass homicide, which is ethically stupefyingly unjustified, and then policy-wise completely stupid, right? The stuff that I fully agree that if we banned guns in the United States or heavily restricted them, the number of gun deaths would go down because fewer people would have them available to kill themselves with. They're the preferred method of suicide among men. Strangely, women who have equal access to guns don't prefer to use them as suicide as often. They use other means. But among men, guns are the preferred method. And that's tragic, although suicide is not the same as homicide. I've known a few people, not close people, but there's one person in my life, an acquaintance, who killed themselves with a gun, who's died of a gun at all. I don't know anyone who was murdered by a gun. I don't know anyone who was murdered, period. But there was a person in my school, a year younger than me, who was friends with my brother, and he very interesting guy, very fun-loving guy, and he developed brain cancer. And he was young. I think he developed it when he was maybe 18 or 19. He was married. He had this beautiful wife. This beautiful life was just starting out, and he fought, I think, maybe 3 or 4 years against brain cancer. And he had insurance. He had medical care. He had the best medical care that you can have. And after years of intense struggle and pain and suffering, it was clear that medically speaking, he would need a miracle, that he was going to die, and he was going to die slowly and painfully, and everyone around him was going to suffer. And so one day he shot himself. He killed himself instead. And that's a tragic, tragic story, and not every suicide is exactly like his. I won't pretend that to be the case. But some of them are like that, and to then point to his death and be like, you should not be able to own a gun because of him, because he killed himself because he had a terminal illness, is completely asinine. And even the people who have different circumstances, who maybe are not terminally ill, or who have not physically suffered in the same way, but are just depressed for other reasons, as tragic as those suicides are, banning guns is not going to make their lives hunky-dory. Most of them are still going to attempt suicide. There is a chance that some of them will be less successful because they don't have guns around, but they're still going to have shitty lives. Most of them are still going to, you can still leap off a bridge, you can still hang yourself, you can still asphyxiate yourself. Countries that have restrictive gun laws don't have lower suicide rates, right? Japan does not have a lower suicide rate. Scandinavia does not have a lower suicide rate. And Scandinavia is kind of in the middle ground when it comes to gun restrictions anyway. But China has a horrible, horrible suicide problem, just like Japan, and they don't have gun rights. They don't have a Second Amendment. They have a one-party dictatorship. So to invoke the suicide deaths is just completely unwarranted. It's misleading. It increases the distinction between the United States and other countries, which I understand for argument's sake why people would want to do that. But if we're gonna count suicides in the United States, then we need to count suicides in other countries too. And then the disparity between the two, which is a clear disparity in homicide. It's a much smaller disparity when we're talking about suicide. I'd have to look. I don't know if the overall, they would definitely narrow, but it's just equivocation between the two. Suicide and homicide are not the same thing. And somebody who is bent on killing people on a premeditated way, who wants to kill as many people as possible, and in many cases, and I don't know about this current one, but in many cases, the perpetrators are completely unconcerned with their own survival. They don't care. No, they're not deterred by getting killed. Then, we're to the point now where, yeah, you can have background checks, you can have all this. They can pass a background check before they've committed the crime. Right? Apparently, this is what happened this time. if they weren't going to pass a background check, they could always steal a gun. They could pay someone else to buy it for them. They could do a straw purchase. We're getting to the point now where technology allows people to make guns on their own. This is already possible, and with every year that goes by, it will become more and more feasible to make better and better firearms. Right, the stuff that you can print on your own right now is usually not the best stuff, but we're not that far from that being a reality, and from a reality to then an affordable reality, and then um, so the policy positions that people make, they're not going to have an effect on these super rare high profile events that are motivating all of the discussion. So it's purely emotional, I think. Emotional, not logical, not empirical. And the thing is, your ideological opponents, the gun rights people, are not buying it. I think the media is heavily biased for gun control, but the media doesn't have a monopoly on the dissemination of information. Not that it ever did, but it's lost a lot of market share, if that's one way to put it. And that cat's out of the bag. So if we want to have an honest discussion, you have to be intellectually honest about it. You have to actually have a discussion. You can't use hyperbole. You can't omit facts. You can't omit things like that other countries had low homicide before they put their gun bans in, or that they still have mass shootings despite the fact, like, the UK has had mass shootings since their things. They had a big mass shooting in 2009 in Cumberland, right? So and like, well, that's one, and the United States said, yeah, sure, but the United States is a bigger country, and also the United States is different for any number of other reasons. And to just isolate one variable and being like, well, that's the variable that must be the cause, is it? I mean, that's really not science. That's just special pleading. So I'm reluctant to talk about stuff like this because we've gone over this so many times, but too many people on the other side are not reluctant to immediately rush in to try and pass their sequence of legislation, which has no relation to the event, right? The stuff that they would, we want to ban the gun show loophole, which is an asinine distinction, but we want to ban private sales. Dude, most of these shooters, all of them even, would pass a background check. They didn't need the gun show loophole, and most of them didn't even use it. I think at Columbine, some of their guns that they had bought legitimately, like at a store with a background check, and some of them they had gotten like at a gun show from a private seller, but they would have passed a background check, so it's completely irrelevant, right? And so if they're going to line up and they're going to make their gun grab or their preliminary to a gun grab, which is what most of the gun control that they're talking about really is, right? These background checks are not effective at reducing crime. They're certainly not effective at deterring or stopping the type of premeditated mass homicides that seems to be the only thing we need to worry about. They are good as a pretext, as a prelude for future restrictions and future controls and future confiscation. That's what they're mostly for, and most gun control supporters will privately admit that. They will. It was fascinating. The person I'm thinking about who kind of instigated all this in my head is in another Facebook group. People had listed a poll on voting, what policy changes would you support to, and to be fair, it listed things that were good, like liberalizing concealed carry and abolishing gun-free zones, but it also listed things like confiscation, requiring permits to own guns, not allowing people to conceal carry, not allow, like, as if that would help in any way a situation like this. And the guy who kind of prompted me to do this, talk about unintended consequences. We get in a Facebook debate, and I'm going to upload this video. Not that it's going to change the world, but it's going to reach more people than his posts. I can guarantee that. Not only is he saying that mass shootings don't happen in other countries and that he supports background checks, but now it's clear that he supported a much broader range of gun control that he knows is not on the table. And so, yeah, in a private Facebook group, he will admit it. The gun control people are not comfortable with people owning guns anywhere near as well as easily as they can, whether it's type, Like whether it's concealed carry, whether it's open carry, whether it's owning multiple firearms, putting all kinds of barriers into ownership. In fact, this particular guy lives in Washington, D.C., and he opposed, D.C. allowing concealed carry because there's so much evidence that concealed carry increases crime. Come on. So the thing is, the gun rights people are aware that that is the desire of the gun control people. This is why the whole not 1 inch more, and I think I made a video just entitled "Not 1 inch more." That's why that's a thing, because the slippery slope is real. The people who are pushing the gun control are not going to be satisfied with closing the gun show loophole. They will not. They are. There's nobody who says once we do that, we'll be good. That's one mass shooting away, and the gun show loophole will not stop a single mass shooting. That's one mass shooting away from, now we need to blah, 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 blah. Ban assault weapons, ban semi-automatic weapons, ban handguns, ban shotguns, ban rifles, ban limit to 1 per year, or put a $500 tax per gun, or require you to get fingerprinted and background checked and blah, 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 blah. And that was the other thing. He called it a hobby. I was like, Second Amendment is not a hobby. Okay? Yes, people shoot as hobbyists. People use guns recreationally. Guns are great. Guns are fun. Blah, blah, blah. All true. That's not why there's a Second Amendment. That's not the only reason to own them. I mean, there's a whole argument about defending yourself from private crime, and we can go into the woods about that. But that's not even the reason either, right? The reason is so we don't end up in a gulag. The reason is so we don't end up in a mass grave. The reason is that, yes, that one 18-year-old bought a gun and committed a mass shooting, but the fact that every 18-year-old can buy a gun means that we don't end up with Mao Zedong sitting on top of us, all right, murdering us by the tens of millions. And people like to pretend, and it's funny too, because these same people who are pro-gun control are the ones who think that Trump is literally Hitler. So these people are going to tell us that Trump is literally Hitler, but then we get in a debate about gun control, and they'll say, you don't need a gun to defend yourself. That's stupid. We live in a democracy. Democracies are always safe. You don't need to protect yourself from the government in a democracy because democracy is perfect, and democracy can't be abused, and democracy can't become totalitarian or authoritarian or tyrannical. Oh, by the way, Donald Trump is worse than Hitler. Okay? It's similar to, like, he can't criticize Haiti or some Arab state and say, oh, we don't want those people here, whatever, they're shitty, blah, 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 which is not exactly what he said anyway. And I hate to be fucking defending him. The guy is a fucking retard when it comes to, like, all sorts of issues. Lots of legitimate reasons to fucking hate Trump. But those same people will then go like, no, we can't compare the homicide rates between Jamaica and the United States because Jamaica is just full of barbarians who are so violent that it doesn't matter that they have restrictive gun laws. They're just going to kill each other regardless. And not just Jamaica, all of Africa and all of Latin America and like half of Asia. So the only countries they want to compare us to are white countries and Japan. That's it. Anyway, so, I shouldn't have to do this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to talk about this. I'd rather talk about other things. I'm interested in other things. I think that it's dancing on the graves, on the blood. You're skidding your arguments with the blood of innocent people by pushing your political agenda in the wake of something like this. But I'm not going to sit by and let people make these stupid arguments to attack my personal liberties with the most fallacious, inconsistent, irrational fear-mongering. I just can't. I'm not going to allow that to happen, so I'm going to make a video about it, and I'm going to upload a video about it. So anyway, that's about it, and I will talk to you all next time.